Okay, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangouts. My name is John Mueller. I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst here at Google in Switzerland, and part of what I do is talk with webmasters like you and make sure that your questions are answered and that your feedback goes back to the engineers and feedback from the engineers comes out to you as well. Before we head off with the Q&A, with the questions that were submitted, do any of you want to ask the first question? No? No need to be shy?
I do, but I know the answer already.
All right.
So then, John, I'll ask
Sure.
just for our thing. But the way you phrased it to Gary the other day was when these things expire. But I know you can't give too much away. But is it something that will expire, or are we waiting for a manual update or a manual action to be removed, or is that something that you can't?
Usually if there's something manual, then that definitely expires. If there's something algorithmic and it hasn't been updated for a while, then at some point we either update that or we turn it off. So it's kind of regardless of which side that's in, at some point that will expire, if you will. But it's something that's hard to say you could just wait it out, for example. Because I guess as a webmaster, if you're trying to get your site out there, it doesn't really make sense to just do nothing in the meantime.
Right, which we don't. But we just, without working with any kind of time scale or knowing that basically anything we do now makes no difference because all of the good work is going into a black hole, how do we then judge whether it's worth putting in that effort? I'm sure by now if it was a manual action you could have just turned it off. If you, like you said to me before, actually we can see you haven't really done anything malicious, so we haven't seen any manual action in Webmaster Tools, so I'm sure you could have just removed it. So I'm assuming it's an algorithm we're waiting to update, which is not something that's happening soon, but I don't know that.
If there's a manual action involved, then that would be visible in Webmaster Tools, yeah.
But there isn't one.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's algorithmic, waiting for update, but we don't know when it will be.
I guess that's the case, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Hi, John. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
In Webmaster, if we look at the Google means smartphones, it's a case of faulty redirect. But in many of the cases, when we make a mobile site, so we do not create all the pages that has been created in desktop sites. So let's say some specific post or article which were in let's say desktop website are not being created, is not being created into the mobile site. So in such scenarios, when we redirect to some other pages, it shows the faulty redirects. So would you like to suggest anything? How can we, apart from creating those pages, is there any way that we can remove those faulty redirects?
So we look at this on a per page basis, but especially in Webmaster Tools, we have the aggregated information there. And I don't think you can take those out of Webmaster Tools specifically. So if you know that you don't want to kind of create mobile-friendly pages for that, then that's fine. But that's something you kind of have to filter out on your side.
Okay. So let's say if we do not create those pages, so and they are going to 404. So how Google will treat them? One side desktop pages are properly optimized, ranking well, and in mobile searches, when a user is clicking on the desktop URL, it is being redirected to 404, which is in mobile cases. So how Google will treat them?
Google will see that. I mean, assuming the desktop page still exists, then Google will see that as a mobile-specific error and try to flag that in the search results. So what I would recommend doing there is just showing the desktop page. If you don't have a mobile-friendly page for that, just let the user see the desktop page. It's not perfect, but at least they can see the content. And when we look at these pages for the search results, we do that on a per URL basis. So we add like the mobile-friendly label or don't show that. So that's not something where having a part of your site mobile-friendly and another part not mobile-friendly would cause the good part of your site any problems.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. All right, let's go through some of the questions here. URL migration best practice. Is it advisable to canonicalize the old URL to the new URL for a couple of weeks before 301 redirecting the old URL to the new URL? Would this make the move faster, clearer for Google, and limit loss in organic traffic? I would only recommend doing that if you assume that there's a technical problem with your redirects. But if you know you can set up a site-wide redirect from one domain to the other one, and you know that this isn't really a technical problem, then I would just set that up and let it run. When we see a site-wide redirect like that, it's a lot easier for us to say this is a clear site move, together with the setting in Webmaster Tools, perhaps, that you might have set. And we can say, well, we really want to move all of these URLs to the new domain. We can crawl it a little bit faster to see that kind of a move happening. And it's a lot easier for us to handle on our side. So if you're kind of like obfuscating a site move, then on our side that almost causes more problems and potentially makes it a lot harder and definitely makes it a lot longer for that site move to be processed for you as well. So if at all possible, I'd really recommend just doing a clear site-wide 301 from the old domain to the new one. Launch of mobile usability analysis in Webmaster Tools. Does this mean that all factors mentioned in the mobile usability are ranking factor for mobile search? That's a good question. I mean, we've been talking a lot about mobile recently, and we've started to show the little label mobile friendly in the search results when we find mobile friendly pages based on these criteria at the moment. We're experimenting with going past just showing that label, but at the moment we don't have anything specific to announce there. So personally, I could imagine that this is something that might happen at some point, but I kind of take that step by step. And I think getting the information in Webmaster Tools gives you a lot of insight into where you might still have room for improvement. And sometimes what we find when we look at sites is that a large part of the site might have moved to a mobile-friendly template, but some part of the site got lost. So, for example, I looked at our help forums recently in Webmaster Tools and noticed that for the largest part, everything had mobile-friendly pages, but some of the profile pages that we have weren't mobile-friendly yet. And that's the kind of information you can pick up in Webmaster Tools. You can see there's still a bunch of errors. You see the sample URLs, and if you look at the samples, you'll say, oh, maybe this is a template of one part of a site that I forgot to update, and then you can update that. So that's kind of what I'd recommend doing there, taking that information, using that to improve the mobile friendliness of your pages, and kind of being prepared for anything else that happens in that regard. Let me mute you for a second. Feel free to unmute if you have any questions. Text hidden for UX reasons. 80% on mobile, 50% on desktop are still being crawled but not indexed. Google finds my hidden text but isn't showing it in the search. The most important stuff is visible. Will it still have a positive effect? So if the text is hidden on your pages, then we see that as something that's not primarily important from your point of view. So if you're hiding content, then that's probably not the most relevant piece of information on these pages. So my recommendation there would be to make sure that important content is visible on your pages so that when users go to your pages, they find this content right away. They see it visible from the start. And then that's something that we'd love to kind of focus on for indexing as well. We do kind of treat hidden content on a page with a little bit of less weight, because usually that's something that users probably aren't primarily seeing and might be confused if we treated this in the same way as something that's primarily visible on a page. So that's something to keep in mind if you have a kind of a tabbed UI, or if you have content that's hidden by default on your pages and you kind of have to click a button or a link somewhere to really bubble that up. If it's critical information for your pages, if it's relevant for your website, make sure it's visible from the start. Maybe move that content to a separate URL if that makes sense, if that's really something that you find is important for your pages. So that's kind of what I'd focus on there. Is there a mobile index? We can't see our site on the smartphone search results. As desktop or tablet, there are normal search results with rel alternate, etc. Okay, you're pointing to a mobile page that's no index, no follow. Okay, so we have a separate mobile index, I think, for feature phones, but not for smartphones. We put the smartphone content into the same search results. So just depending on which device you're searching from, that's essentially what you'd be seeing there. If you've set up a smartphone-friendly website on a separate URL, I'd really recommend making sure that you follow our recommendations with regards to the redirects, with regards to robots text, with regards to no index, all of that. And if you're no indexing, or if you're blocking by robots text your smartphone-friendly pages, then we can't really take that into account for the search results. So we really need to be able to crawl and index those pages normally.
Okay.
Yes.
John, can I ask a question?
Sure.
We have a client who serves dynamically content to on same URL different content, different HTML source code for mobile and desktop. So will this affect ranking somewhere, because we have seen some variation in rankings of the same URL in mobile and desktop? Though the content is same, only the design part is different, and they have created two different websites just for the mobile friendly part of it.
If the content is equivalent, and if you're setting those pages up properly with regards to our guidelines, then that should be fine. There's nothing special you need to do there. If the content isn't equivalent, say you're selling shoes on the desktop page and T-shirts on the mobile page, then that's something where we say, well, these are probably two separate sites. We shouldn't be treating them equivalent. But if it's equivalent content, that seems like the right setup there.
Okay. Thank you.
So the design doesn't play that much of a role in that case. Also, if you kind of hide things on the mobile page, that's less of a problem. For example, if you're hiding like the sidebar, the headings, the footer, those kind of things, if you have smaller images, then that's all fine to have on the mobile page. The primary content should just be equivalent.
Okay, fine, great. Now, again, the different question related to quality guidelines.
Sure.
If it's from the black hat perspective, if a website is, we have seen a couple of websites which are doing sticky directs and clocking both, but at the same time they are stable in ranking, and we have seen they are building links significantly. So, but the point that I wanted to raise is neither they are increasing in keyword ranking nor they are decreasing. They are stabilized on their part. So what is the reason behind it? Means Google can't see those sneaky redirects and all this stuff?
It depends. So there are lots of things that kind of come into play with the ranking. What I recommend doing there is just making sure that you file a spam report so that we're kind of aware of that situation. But sometimes what I see is that normal sites that are doing something bad are kind of stable in ranking as well, and it's not the case that we're ignoring their sneaky things that they're trying to do, but rather that these sneaky things are pulling them down a little bit, but they're still otherwise fairly reasonable. So we keep showing them in the search results. Obviously, there are situations that we get wrong where maybe we show a bad site very high in the search results, even though they're doing sneaky things. And that's the kind of thing that we'd love to hear about in the spam reports. But for the most part, we take the feedback from the spam reports to help improve our algorithms and to help improve our systems as well. So we don't manually go through all of the URLs in our search results to find exactly the ones that are problematic and to kind of manually take that out. That's kind of impossible with the size of the web. But we do use that feedback to figure out what we need to be focusing on. And that's definitely useful. So it's hard to say if they're just ranking because they're doing other things really good or if they're ranking because they're getting away with sneaky things. But regardless of the case, that's something you can tell us about, and we'll take a look at that to see what we could be doing differently.
Great, great. Okay. Thank you.
If you're a new entrant and new domain in a segment where there are already lots of high-quality, high-ranking sites, what's the best strategy? Would you be best to focus on a niche, long-tail keywords, searches first, lots of pages, or just a few? I think this is almost like a business or marketing question, because if you're a business that's going into an area where there are already well-established players, where there's already a lot happening, a lot of kind of strong competition in place, then that's always going to be a really tough situation, regardless if that's online or offline. What I recommend doing there is trying to find an area that you can focus on where you can kind of build up, where you're doing something very special that the other players maybe don't want to do or that they can't do. So instead of trying to compete one-on-one with the really strong competitors that might be out there, find something that they're not interested in and kind of focus on that, become a really strong website in that regard, and build out from that slowly. So instead of trying to do the same as everyone else, find something that makes you special and that makes your site special. We own 2 e-commerce sites with similar products and descriptions. When this happens, does Google choose to rank one over the other? They each target a slightly different audience by the marketing and look. Will Google see them as duplicate and just rank one? Sometimes we will see these kind of sites as duplicate and try to pick one of them to show in the search results. It kind of depends on what kind of sites these are. But essentially, if you're selling the same product, if you're the same company, and someone is searching for that product in general, then it wouldn't make sense to show that listing essentially twice. So from that point of view, for the user, we do try to fold those kind of sites into one and say, this is one site. We'll show you one search results. Sometimes that doesn't work so well. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to do that if they're really significantly different. So kind of take that with a grain of salt. What I'd recommend doing in a case like this, if it's just 2 sites, I think that might be fine. If you have more than 2 or 3 sites, then I'd recommend folding those together into one really strong site instead of kind of diluting your efforts across multiple sites. It's reported in SMX Milan that you said page speed of desktop version is used as a ranking signal for the mobile version. If the desktop version is fast enough and the mobile is too slow, it doesn't affect ranking. I think at the moment this is correct. So we do focus on the desktop page for the search results for the most part. That's also the one that you use with the rel canonical. As we pick up more information from mobile-friendly pages or from mobile pages in general, then I would expect that to flow into the rankings as well. So that's something to keep in mind there. I'd still make sure that your mobile-friendly pages are as fast as possible, that they work really well on mobile devices, that you're going past just essentially the required minimum that we have with the mobile-friendly tool, and really providing a great experience on mobile, because lots of people are using mobile to kind of make their decisions, to read content, and if your site is kind of minimally usable on mobile, but really a bad user experience, really, really slow, then that's something that users will notice as well, and they'll jump off and do something else or go to a different site. Is it possible for a competitor to strip an article from your website before it gets crawled and submit it as its own content? Duplicate content in the eyes of Google's search engine, for example. I guess theoretically this is possible. In practice, it's not something that I would expect to happen like this, or that I would expect to cause any problems, because we're pretty good at recognizing the original source of the content, even if we first saw it somewhere else. And this is something that's fairly common in that sometimes a site will have a blog feed, for example, and that feed might get picked up somewhere else before we actually pick up and use that content for web search, and that's not necessarily a problem. So even if in an extreme case a competitor picks up one of your pages and copies that content onto their site and gets it indexed first, that's not something that I would assume would cause any problems at all for a website. Let's see, in the chat, there's some question about the lower thirds. I have no idea if there's anything special happening there. I see some of you have them active and some of you don't, but there is no setting on my side that disables it. Let's put it that way. A few weeks ago, I submitted a mobile sitemap for a dynamic mobile site using the same URL theme based on the user agent. I don't see that Google indexes that. Is that normal? Does Google use... Well, different question. So the mobile sitemap is essentially for feature phone pages. It's not for smartphone pages. So that might be something that you kind of ran into there. So if you're doing a smartphone-friendly site, then I just use a normal sitemap file. You can also include, I believe, the rel alternate and rel canonical markup in the sitemap file. Personally, I try to keep it on the pages themselves because it makes it easier to debug what you're actually doing. But essentially, if you're using the same URLs for a smartphone-friendly site, then I would just submit those URLs normally with your normal sitemap file. Does Google use custom search users' behavior statistics as signals? I'm not really sure what you mean there. Do you want to elaborate?
Yes, Google use some statistics about the user usage when they go to your website and bounce back to Google, but you use the custom search also.
So the custom search, I think, is when you embed like a search engine for your site.
Yes.
I think that's essentially just a feature that we make available. I don't think we use anything special from there, because you can embed it in so many different ways that it's really hard for us to, I guess, even look at that. But even with regards to normal user behavior signals, that's not something I'd say that we'd use directly in search. So we do use that kind of information to determine if our algorithms are working as they should be, but kind of taking that down to a site level isn't really something that I think makes a lot of sense. Can we expect Penguin to refresh more than once a year this time around to help the sites who've cleaned up and demote sites that are ranking through spammy techniques? My understanding is that we're working on improving the speed there, so I would definitely expect that to be a little bit faster this time around. I don't have anything specific to announce. I don't have any specific dates that I could give you guys, so I don't think that'll be happening next week or anything really soon like that, but I know the team kind of is working on improving the speed there as well. Oh, here's the custom search question. Yes, Joshua.
Oh, I thought I was in the wrong HOA for a little bit there because I hadn't heard a penguin question for the first half of the meeting. Yeah, I was going to ask about a question regarding, are there any, well, Matt Cutts has previously talked about some algorithms that specifically relate to, or that Google was looking into finding ways to verify or show authority of medical related type sites like health, natural supplement, these kind of sites. And I believe in the past he's referred to it in relation to, you know, looking at a authorship authority or site authority or something like that. But then also, you know, in relation to, you know, these things, because they're important about people's health and stuff. We don't just want, you know, any site that, you know, in the long term, it would be good to find the more reputable type of sites in this particular genre. So, are there any algorithms recently that have focused more closely on that you could mention anything about?
I don't know of anything specific that I could tell you about there. So, I don't know. Nothing that I'm really aware of in that regard. I know this, especially the medical area, is something that we try to keep an eye on a little bit to make sure that we're giving the right information to users, because that can sometimes have a really strong effect. But I'm not aware of any specific algorithms that would be specifically focusing on the things that you mentioned there. So
okay, yeah,
I'm sure.
I was looking at a client site related to, you know, vitamin supplements, but it's not the it's e-commerce site, but not the more kind of spammy type of Viagra, steroids, or any of that kind of site. It's all pretty and it's well done, not in any kind of spammy way. Yet it seems like a while back they got pushed down considerably. So I was just wondering if there had been anything more closely related to that, or did the payday loans algorithm include much specific in that genre that you know of?
No, that would be really specific to like payday loan sites. That wouldn't be something that we'd kind of like spread across all different kinds of websites.
Okay, because I thought that algorithm update, even though that was used as the original name, but that it was talked about in the latter updates of it, that it was focusing across the board on any kind of sites that are known to topics that are known to have you know, more spammy associations with them, and maybe either quality factors or keyword stuffing. Or
I don't think so. Sorry, but yeah, I don't think that's the case in that case. So I think specifically with regards to like the site that you mentioned, I haven't taken a look at that site. I don't know what the URL is, but in general, what I'd recommend doing there is just really making sure that the quality of the website overall is as high as it can be, and focusing on the normal things as well there. So I wouldn't assume that there's anything exotic holding back a site like that that's kind of reasonable but not really great. I'd really try to focus on the normal things there and just make sure that it's really the highest quality site it can be.
Yeah, and so of course you've got the the general e-commerce site challenges, where there's, what do you write about each individual topic and things like that, of course. And then there's the topic of sliders on the top of the page, and we've talked about that in relation to the layout algorithms and stuff. Do you think, because they are still quite popular, especially with a lot of very uniquely designed websites, like I was looking at something in the jewelry category, like diamond e-commerce sites. So it's very visual, and they want to start with a lot of sliding images at the top. Do you see there being much challenges there in that regard?
I don't see a problem with that. I think that's absolutely fine. If you have a great website design that uses these kind of sliders, that's fine. I think one aspect I just kind of watch out for is that you're not putting the most important relevant information in these kind of sliders on top, because if it's not really visible when we kind of crawl the page, for example, if the slider number 3 has the most important information for that website on it, if that's not directly visible, then we're not going to be treating that with as much weight when we kind of crawl and index that page. So if these are images that just lead to different parts of the site, if these are kind of like current ads or current information that kind of lead to different parts of the site, but not really the primary reason for visiting this page, then that's absolutely fine. And I think even from a usability point of view, if slider number 3 is the most important part of your page, then that's probably going to be a bit confusing for users. So for the most part, people are probably doing this right and using these sliders as a way to kind of draw attention to different parts of the site, and that's perfectly fine.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Sure.
John, can I ask a follow-up to that payday loan question?
Sure.
Can you, I know you can't speak specifics, but can you tell us roughly how you would determine whether someone was in the payday loan industry? Because we found connections with our site to, and just throwing a URL in the chat now, that payday loan sites have scraped our entire site, including the analytics code and other codes. And so if sites, scraper sites, not scraper sites, so if analytics sites and these kind of ranking sites say actually your domain is associated with this one, then Google has as much, if not lots more information on that. And if this type of site looks at our site and says, well, you're basically the same domain as this site, then is that something that can ever be used as a signal to Google, or are you not going to be that naive?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen these kind of domain informational sites pop up every now and then, and that's not something I'd really worry about. Like, the links from those kind of sites aren't really something that we worry about. Which sites that they think might be related to your site, I wouldn't worry about that. These are essentially just like auto-generated sites with information they can pull from the web.
Right, because at first glance, obviously, we then think, Christ, were we under payday loan algorithm? So that leads me to think, well, maybe we are. What do you use to think we might be a payday loan company when clearly we're not?
Yeah.
But you would never use this kind of.
I wouldn't say we never use this kind of information. If we don't have anything else to go by, then we might crawl that page and think, oh, well, there are like 2 links on here. Maybe they're related. But for any website that has been on the web for more than a couple of weeks, we have just lots of other information that we can use. So that's something where we can say, well, these are pages that are auto-generated. We can crawl and index them, but that doesn't mean that we give them any value.
Right, but I don't mean don't mean their site. I mean what they're using to determine that we're related. you clearly have the same information, whether it's the same domain owner, the same analytics. They're using analytics code because they've scraped our entire page and our analytics code has been caught up there.
I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay.
I mean, there are lots of ways that people kind of pull in this information for those kind of domain information sites, and I don't know, we've been crawling the web for quite a long time, and we see a lot of other kinds of information. So I wouldn't really focus on what those sites say. And sometimes you'll run across those sites saying, like, hey, this domain is for sale. You could just like send an offer to this guy, and in reality, your domain is like, I'm keeping this forever. Nobody's going to take it away from me. So those are the kind of things where we crawl and index those pages, but we don't really give them that much weight.
Right, but again, it's not the page, it's what they're using, which is essentially the analytics code that I was concerned about.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Yes. We have a problem with HTTPS. We have a website without HTTPS, and when we search that HTTPS format of that URL, it shows that it is being blocked by robot.txt. So can you look at that URL?
What I do there is use the Webmaster Tools robots text tool.
No, we have checked that, and there's no problem with the robots, even though it is showing that HTTPS version is blocked, and without HTTPS version is not blocked. So how is it possible? We did not put any robots. We did not do anything on that.
What sometimes happens, so I don't know if this is the case in this case, but if we can't reach the robots text file for a site, then we'll assume that the whole site is blocked. So that's something that might be happening there. Maybe your robots text file is blocked from crawling it completely, then we would see the whole site is being blocked from crawling. So,
no, this is not the case. We have checked that. Rather, that HTTPS version, it is not being certified. It is not present at all.
Yeah.
So when you access.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like when I try to access it, my browser doesn't even let me look at it. So, and if I search for the domain name itself without HTTPS, then I get the normal search result. So
yes.
I wouldn't worry about that. That's fine. I mean, we've crawled and tried to index that page. We tried to crawl it, and we noticed that robots text wasn't letting us through. So we have it like that in our index, but that doesn't mean that people will see it. It doesn't mean that it's going to cause any problems.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, is the number of listings in a list page counted as content? For example, for a job site, number of jobs available in the category. So we can display this on top of our mobile sites where space is limited. I don't think we count the number of entries in a list page. But one thing I kind of watch out for with these kind of pages is that they're not completely auto-generated. That there's actually some content there on these pages. So instead of just providing search results pages, make sure that they're really of value, those pages, and then if you have a mobile version for that, then that's great. So I wouldn't see the number as something that I'd say is a primary ranking factor from Google's point of view, but really just make sure that these pages work well for the user, that they're seen as being high-quality content. If there are user experience, that there's probably no similar page on the mobile side. Is this different? For example, no voucher page on mobile, but on desktop. Which page will the search results for smartphone show? So if we know that there's an equivalent smartphone-friendly page, and a user is searching on smartphones, and we'll try to show that page in the search results. If we know that there's no equivalent smartphone-friendly page, then we'll just show the normal desktop page in the search results. So it's not that we block the desktop pages completely from being shown in search. It's just that we try to bring those smartphone users a little bit faster to the smartphone-friendly version of that page. When building a mobile version of our page, is it better to start a new project in a separate folder with a subdomain, or is it better to make the existing page more responsive? Is there best practice on how to start a mobile version without duplicate content? So as best practices, I'd recommend double-checking our guidelines. We have, for smartphones, a lot of information now, a lot of new information on how to make a smartphone-friendly site. If you're using a common content management system, sometimes there are simple steps that you can do to kind of activate the mobile-friendly version of your site. So that's kind of where I'd start off on. If you realize that you have to do this yourself, then our recommendation is to use responsive design, which means you keep the same URLs, and you essentially just create an alternate CSS that smartphones could use to display your content, for example. If you can't do a responsive web design, we also support two other variations, either serving different content on the same URLs or serving the smartphone-friendly page on a different URL. And with those three options, usually there's one approach that works for you, and I just follow that approach. It's not that we'd say you need to go to a responsive design. It's not that we say you need to kind of follow our recommendations, but rather we support these different types, and we just think of these different types, responsive works the best for most sites, so we kind of recommend that. But you can rank just as well with all of the other types there that we support.
John, since this is a mobile discussion, supposedly, do you have any comments on responsive versus adaptive, and what some common issues might be around those?
What do you mean with adaptive?
Well, and so the screen resizes to a particular size rather than totally reactive. And I think Nick's asking the same question now in the chat, actually. So maybe you just want to answer.
Oh, okay. So dynamic serving. Okay, so that would be when your server essentially serves like different HTML to smartphone users. Essentially, we support both of those types. So that's something where if you say adaptive leads to better kind of user experience for your users, or where you're saying adaptive is easier for us to implement and maintain on our side, then go for that. So it's not the case that I say that either of these would rank lower in the search results. We essentially support all of those three different types. So with regards to common issues there, I think when we look at these sites, most of the time we look at them when something goes wrong. And with responsive web design, we see that fewer things go wrong because essentially it's the same HTML. If we can process the desktop version, we can process the mobile version as well, provided we can still see the CSS. With adaptive, what we sometimes see is that people sniff the user agent wrong, that they think that the mobile Googlebot is actually a normal desktop Googlebot, may serve the desktop content to our smartphone crawlers. Those are the kind of issues that we see going wrong. I haven't really run across a lot of usability issues where I'd say this is kind of would have been better handled with a responsive design. Most of the time, it's just technical issues that are sometimes really tricky to diagnose on your side. So if you're always serving the desktop content to Googlebot, even the smartphone Googlebot, then that's not something that would be immediately visible in Webmaster Tools. And that's something that's sometimes really tricky to figure out what's actually happening there. What I'd recommend doing there, if you suspect that this might be happening, or if you want to double check that it isn't happening, is use the Webmaster Tools Fetch and Render feature and select the smartphone option there. That way you can see exactly what smartphone Googlebot is seeing. You can see if it's able to pick up the videos, for example, if you have videos on there, and that it actually shows you what was roboted, for example, or what isn't roboted. So that's the kind of thing I'd watch out for. Usually we run across the issues more when there's really something critical happening on these sites. So it's not the case that I have a lot of best practices to share with regards to creating an adaptive site. Okay, and do links from crawled Google Play apps pass PageRank or any signals to my website? I don't know how the Google Play website is set up. I assume that most of these links will have a nofollow attached, and in that case, we won't do anything special with them. In any case, it's not that we treat the Google Play website in any kind of a special way. If we can crawl the pages on there and we can find links on there that don't have a nofollow attached, then we'll try to forward that PageRank appropriately. So it's not that there's any kind of special casing for the Google Play website. Authorship. Oh, man. Authorship was an idea that appealed to many of us. A few months later, it was removed from the search results. So I think it was actually a few years later, but more or less. In many places, it's mentioned that the real reason was a drop in click advertising. Is that true? No, that's definitely not true. We do take into account what's happening with regards to clicks on ads. And from a web search point of view, if we notice that more people are clicking on ads, that's actually a bad sign for us. So that's something where we'd say if any change that we do results in more people clicking on ads, then that means our search results are doing a worse job. That means we're doing something wrong. So that's essentially our point of view. We try to take into account the long-term picture, and if we're doing something in search that results in people being less happy with our search results, then they're going to, over time, use other things for search, and that's not really going to help us. So the more we can kind of keep people in search, we can make sure that we're bringing the right search results to people that they can click on, that actually bring value for them, then I think we're kind of headed in the right direction. And we definitely wouldn't launch a feature where we know ahead of time that people are going to click more on ads. And we wouldn't remove a feature if we know ahead of time that this change will lead to people clicking more on ads. So that's something that's definitely not playing a role there. Webmaster Tools shows duplicate title tags for products that are on my homepage and collection selection, even though Shopify rel canonicals duplicates of the same products when they're in multiple categories. I probably have to take a look at the examples to see what specifically you're seeing there. But in general, if you have the same title tag on multiple pages, we'll show that in Webmaster Tools. Sometimes even if we see a rel canonical there. So Webmaster Tools in that regard is a little bit almost on a lower level, that it says, well, we crawled these pages and we saw the same title, therefore we'll let you know about that, just in case you weren't aware of that. And if you're using a rel canonical to kind of simplify that already, then that's something you've essentially taken care of. Another thing to keep in mind is that a rel canonical is something that we have to process as a second or a third step. So what sometimes happens is we'll actually crawl and index a page with a rel canonical set to a different URL. And we'll keep that original page in our index for a while, even if we've perhaps crawled and indexed the other URL, because we kind of see this as a unique URL on its own first. And over time, when we can process the rel canonical, we'll forward the signals to the canonical page, but at least in the beginning, we'll definitely crawl and index that page first like that, even if it has a rel canonical pointing to something else. If you really want to prevent that from happening, and usually you don't really need to prevent that from happening, you could use a 301 instead of a rel canonical. And a 301 essentially tells us right when we're crawling, we should go to the other URL. Whereas a rel canonical is something that kind of has to be processed first. You said hidden text is not so relevant for pages. Does this mean only the text is not relevant for it, or also videos or links? For example, I have a relevant link or video on a tab, which is only visible when I click the tab. Should I also show that? So in general, this is something where if the content isn't really visible, then it's really hard for us to say whether or not it makes sense to put a lot of weight on this content. And it doesn't really matter if it's a video, if it's a link, if it's images. This is essentially something that's been the case for a really long time now, that if this is really important and relevant content, then make sure that it's actually visible. One way to think about this is if a user is searching for that content specifically, something perhaps hidden, or let's say not so hidden in a tab, where you kind of have to click the tab to see that content. If a user is searching for that content, they land on your page, and they look at your page and say, well, this isn't really that content that I was searching for. It's not the image of, I don't know, a car that I was looking for, but rather a big piece of text or an image of something else, then they kind of feel frustrated in that they didn't really get what they were looking for. So we try to preempt that a little bit by saying, well, if it's hidden, maybe it's not really that important for the user. Maybe we shouldn't be putting that much weight on it. So with that in mind, if this is something that you think is really important for your users, make sure it's either visible when they go to that page, or if you think that this is significant enough, maybe set up a separate URL where this is actually visible. If it's essentially auxiliary information that the user might want to look at for a really kind of in-depth review of that page or that content, then maybe it's fine to keep it in a tab or keep it behind something like a click here to learn more link. So that's something where I wouldn't say you always need to do it one way or the other, but rather to think about how important is this content? Is it relevant enough that you actually want to have it visible right away, or is it something that you don't really find that critical for this page, but users might like it to get a little bit more information? Let's see, here's one. When there's an update to algorithms like the Rolling Panda update, is it data from the last month worth of crawls, or is it from a few months earlier? We've noticed that it takes a few months for big site improvements to be picked up. In general, these are things where we don't have like a cutoff date and say it has to be on this date or it has to be crawled on this date, because we can't crawl the whole web all the time. We have to make regular decisions on which part of the web we should crawl today, which part we should crawl tomorrow, which parts we should crawl every couple of hours, which parts we think probably only make sense to crawl maybe once a year or once every couple of months. So these are things that all come into play, and from a technical point of view, it's not even possible to say, well, we'll only take everything into account that was crawled last month, because there's some things that we haven't crawled last month. And we can't really like throw them away and say, well, if they were crawled a year ago, it doesn't really mean that they're relevant now, because these could be really important pieces of information, but they just don't change that frequently, so we don't crawl them that frequently. So just because we crawl them more often or less often doesn't infer that it's like doesn't infer its importance for us. So with that in mind, when updates look at the data in our index, we don't focus just on a period of time that we've actually crawled, but rather on everything that we've collected until about that time. All right, we're running low on time. Happy to give you guys a chance to ask some more direct questions if you have anything specific.
Hey, John.
Questions.
Hi. All right. John, I put a link here in the chat. That's something I was talking about. I mean, I don't know if right off that there's any particularly obvious problems there. But
okay, I could take a look at it after the hangout. Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes when we use the site search function to look at indexed content. We don't always get the same results. I mean, sometimes at different times, even maybe it's a indexing anomaly, but we'll see quite a good number of changes in those results. I don't know if that's because it's during an update or something like that. Do you know about that? I mean, that function is basically you use the site, and then you don't include the www in there. Are there any special variations in which that function could be better utilized?
So I think it's kind of important to keep in mind that the site query is something that's pretty artificial that normal users don't do. So we don't necessarily focus so much on that. It's not something where I'd say if a URL is listed there or not indexed there, or if a URL is like ranked first, like you do a site query for your site and the homepage isn't ranked first, that's a sign of a problem. So that's essentially something we try to maintain. We try to use as a filter for some of the indexed URLs there, but it's not meant to be a comprehensive listing. The count of the results on there isn't meant to be a comprehensive count of the indexed URLs. It's essentially something that we're trying to provide a quick set of search results based on that query. So I wouldn't necessarily use that. I wouldn't use it necessarily as a diagnostics tool, for example.
Okay, yeah. So often it doesn't match up with you know, the sitemap index diagnostics in Webmaster Tools or other data.
Yeah.
So I guess that's quite common.
Yeah,
too.
that's completely normal. So I'd use Webmaster Tools for things like that. And the sitemaps count that you mentioned, the index status information in Webmaster Tools, I wouldn't use site query for that kind of diagnostics information.
All right, thanks.
Ramesh, I think you had a question too.
Yes. So my question is regarding that app indexing thing. So we recently updated our basically the Android version linking with our pages. So now it's starting indexing within Google itself. But the problem is like it's only we just see our listing with the Google now, not with the Chrome result. I mean, how we can get this particular view in app listing within the Chrome, despite of that Google now. And this thing, this is attending this particular visual description by any specific related queries, like from the brand terms or maybe from generic term as well. Where we are just already ranking for example, we are just ranking for the mobiles. So is there any chances to get all those listings with these particular laptops, mobiles, or anything like that?
I'm having a really hard time understanding your question from a sound, but I think it's about getting your app indexed and showing that in the search results in Chrome on smartphone, right? What I would do there is maybe do a short post in the help forum about the problem that you're seeing there, and I can send someone who's more familiar with the app indexing side to look at your specific site. So if you can post in the help forum with the specifics of a URL of your site and the app that you're using there, then I can point someone at that for you. All right. Looks like we're kind of out of time. It's been great questions here again. So let me just double check that I have the links that you guys sent me. And I wish you guys a great weekend. Thank you all for joining. See you next week.
Vishal.
Bye.
Ciao.
Take care.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.